Hello booktubers and super friends. So Roy here and going to talk about Novelisation November.
Hooray!
Where I did read some novelisations and tie-ins. I don't think I read anything from the TBR video I did a while ago, but I did read the books I'm going to tell you about. So this was an event devised by Andrew at It Came From The Page, and lots of fun. The idea is to read various kinds of novelisation adaptations into book form of other media. So to start with, A Hard Day's Night.
Oh, Hard Day's
Night by
John
Burke.
Saw the pictures when I was little.
Yeah, I did see it when I was little, not at the pictures though. So I had very little memory of it except a lot of running about.
There is a lot of running about.
And that it had the Beatles in it.
Yeah.
John Burke gets quite a lot of airtime on this channel, most recently for some original stuff he did that were occult detective books, the Caspian and Bronwyn books. But he's novelised anything that moves, he would novelise it. This was quite early in his career. I think the first novelisation he did was of The Entertainer movie, which it was itself a adaptation of a play. Just one of the endless permutations of the fabulous world of novelisation. So here we go. Obviously Beatles, this was I think 1964. Beatles were massively famous by this time. We're getting the Beatles in their first fab film.
Woohoo!
Which we're told it's The Gear. One long crazy adventure with the beat never flagging for a minute. John, Paul, George and Ringo hit London, and how? In this hilarious action-packed novel based on their wonderful first film. Follow their wild and wacky escapades. They seem to have got the wrong end of the stick. This looks like the Monkees.
Well, everything the Monkees did, the Beatles had done.
Yeah.
In their films.
And
before.
I think it was the success of this movie spawned the Monkees.
Yeah. Can I just say, on a point of English usage, that in my recollection of those heady days when I was 9, I don't think the phrase was the gear. I think it was just gear. So you'd say something was gear, like you'd say it was fab or groovy or whatever. Well,
you'd expect by the time something out of the sort of popular culture reaches the world of people designing covers of panned paperbacks, that it would be somewhat got slightly wrong.
It's like I heard a popular culture pundit on a Radio 4 programme many years ago talking about how great it was, a phrase she'd learnt from her students: it's got pants. For those of you who don't know, the phrase actually is it's pants.
Yes,
rubbish, the opposite of gear.
We think that's maybe it's a double bluff. Anyway, gear or the gear. Well, it also says there are 8 pages of illustrations in photogravure.
Whoopee!
Between pages 64 and 65, which sounds like something I'd read in one of my Victorian magazines.
It's what the kids want, a bit of photogravure.
But the thing is, obviously quite hard to novelise a film that's pretty sort of got a pretty tangential grip on reality, and all this running around and energy, and the fact that people were going to see it, probably not so much for the story. But I'm gonna say, if I'd come across this without the covers or anything and was just reading the text only, it would read like it would be one of those subdued menace type of things to start with. It would feel pretty dark and gritty, certainly in the opening sequences.
Did it feel like a Harold Pinter play?
I was thinking Harold Pinter, something like The Caretaker.
Yeah.
So let me read this first page to you. The old man hadn't wanted to come in the first place. He didn't want their pity, and he didn't want to be pushed off to London even for a few days. Liverpool had been good enough for him for a long time now. There were plenty of things in Liverpool to keep a man occupied. London had been all right when he was younger. Wouldn't be so good nowadays. Not in the company of a gang of boys, anyway. If he'd been on his own now, it might have been different. He'd have found ways of livening the place up. The trouble was that they wouldn't let him be on his own. Wouldn't take their eyes off him since that bit of difficulty with that widow, and then with the woman he'd wanted to marry. And that might have all worked out if they hadn't interfered. Always interfering, that was their trouble. Just wouldn't leave a man alone, watching him all the time as though it wasn't safe to let him out. So, and he goes on, the dialogue's elliptical. You don't know who these boys are who keep smiling and keep staring at this old man, or why. It's mentioned that they work with electrical equipment. That sounds quite menacing, out of context. And also that they're covered in hair. But it doesn't say where, so they could be like hirsute monsters.
Instead of being hirsute monsters like they are.
Well, it probably was still shocking stuff, wasn't it, this hair business. But yes, obviously I do know who the Beatles are, and I had rough memories of the film, which we've rewatched since then. And the novelisation's fine. I mean, he really gives it a go. Stuff that's really purely visual, like there's a bit where they rush into a park and start playing football, and it's sort of seen from above just with them messing about. He describes that quite effectively. And probably my favourite bit of the movie and the book is where Ringo wanders off, and there's a bit where he's wandering through London, and it's only 20 or so years since the end of the war, so there's still like bomb sites and things. So that's quite interesting. He doesn't. John Burke doesn't really describe the music, but he probably doesn't need to, because no one's going to have bought this without knowing the songs already. You know, it's just like the boys are sort of, giving it a lot of energy on the stage, sort of thing. But yeah, Hard Day's Night. Read that. Then I read Goldeneye. Novelisation of Goldeneye, the James Bond film from the mid-90s by John Gardner. So that's John Gardner, the spy writer, not John Gardner, the litfic writer who did a version of Beowulf, although I think they should have given him a go as well. So this John Gardner had been doing continuation Bond novels for quite a long time, since the 1980s, and they're pretty good. I mean, he famously wrote more Bond than Ian Fleming ever did. I'd read most of those, but never read this one. So when I came across it, I thought, let's read this. Partly because it will work for the Novelisation November, but also it would give me a slight inroad into Dr. No-vember, the celebration of espionage fiction, where I know the hosts include Book Time with Elvis, Mystery and Mayhem. I'll put the details down below. So yeah, Goldeneye. Had seen the film long time ago.
And you say I was there as well.
Yeah, you've seen it. Yeah.
But that's partly because my brain refuses to engage with James Bond films at all.
Well, we did see it. And like a lot of the sort of first, this was the first Pierce Brosnan movie. Like a lot of the first ones, it was pretty good in its own way. And John Gardner makes a valiant effort to make it sort of realistic. He even puts in a couple of little lines that tie it in with his own series of books, as if it's like you had the John Gardner books, then this happened. Although one thing he was always saying about in his own continuation novels was that the gadgets are real. There's nothing here in the book that you couldn't actually go and buy from like a security company. So he had to throw that out the window because the movie's got Q and weird devices, so has to have them. But yeah, he does some of the Fleming-like touches, you know, the sort of descriptions of places, you know, sort of cities and countries around the world, and like high living. They seem to come from some kind of raffish uncle who does really know all that stuff, so that sort of works well. And being a book, he can give Bond lots, you know what he's thinking as well as what he's doing on the screen, and he does seem to make it pretty real, pretty credible most of the time. Now and again, he just gives up and just says what happens. There's a fight in a Turkish bath. What do they call them? Those steam room things.
Like a banya.
I guess so. Yeah.
That's not Turkish. It's Eastern European.
I think it's just described as a steam room.
Yeah.
With one of the big adversaries, Tanya, on a top. So he just think I'm just writing what's in the script. You can tell, like a lot of novelisations, it's written before the film has actually been finalised, because some things are a little bit different. Notably, here in the book, there's a bit where James Bond is driving a tank through St. Petersburg.
It's that one.
It's that one. Crashes into a lorry filled with cans of beer. The beer cans go everywhere, and the locals are like picking them up. That's the thing. That must have been the early version of the script that he was working from. I've read somewhere that in the shooting script, beer has been changed to cans of Pepsi, which is a little bit sort of funnier as a kind of, hey, look, Russia's getting westernised these days. But in the final thing on the screen, due to product placement monies, it's cans of Perrier. So those cans had been 3 different things.
Can I just say, point of information, no self-respecting Russian drinks beer except as a hangover cure, and they would have preferred the Pepsi.
Yes, I thought that it was a little detail of inauthenticity.
Yes, I remember hating the smashing up of Leningrad, St. Petersburg beer.
It wasn't real.
No, I know, but it just made me ever so cross.
Yeah, well, that's Glasnost, comrade. From there, sticking with both the numbers, so the Fab 4, 007, British Legends. Moving on to Doctor Who. So one of the prompts in Novelisation November is to read an adaptation of something where you didn't like the original, which I've actually done twice, because I read there's a book version of the Disney animated A Christmas Carol, but I'll be getting to that in a video all about versions of A Christmas Carol coming up. This, Doctor Who, the TV movie, also mid-90s, and I remember watching it, being quite excited about it, and thinking, this has just fallen on its face, it's terrible. So this is the one with Paul McGann, the monocled mutineer.
He was much better as the monocled mutineer than he was as Doctor Who.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he wasn't the problem.
No.
He was quite good, and he has popped up in the show, as well as doing audio stuff as well. So it's another mid-90s spectacular, and a bit like that makes it a little bit of a historical novel. So sort of historical detail in this is somebody reading all those books that everybody had to read in the 90s. Armalite Dolphin. There were 6 of them.
Armistead Mopan.
Armistead Mopan, yes. Someone's reading an Armistead Mopin book. So in here, James Bond, the mid-90s-ness of it that makes it feel like a sort of well-crafted historical novel set in the 90s are things like email being a novelty where it's worth like spelling out all the sort of subject lines and stuff. A 486 being the high-spec PC, and I've forgotten those even existed.
Oh my God.
The best of all, like peak 90s tech is in Bond's car. The CD player doubles as a fax machine.
Yes, I want one of those.
It's exactly what you need. Anyway, yes, so this Doctor Who thing, so at the time this came out, a one-off freestanding movie, and the idea was there were going to be others. Doctor Who had always been a series, weekly episodes on the BBC, and been going since the early 60s. We've all got our sort of memories of it. Hadn't been on screen for number of years, so it just sort of faded away really. So this was like a big reboot, and because this was a bit of a flop, it flopped in America apparently. People watched it over here, but it wasn't successful in America, maybe because it sort of launches into itself talking about all sorts of Doctor Who lore. It's quite tied into Doctor Who backstory stuff, so people who'd never heard of the character were probably like, I'm not invested in this. So one thing about Doctor Who, in case you don't know, is he regularly regenerates. So rather than like dying or being recast, he's like rematerializes as a different person. That happens in this. You see Sylvester McCoy, the 7th Doctor, regenerating as Paul McGann, the 8th Doctor, but something goes a bit wrong. So to start with, this Doctor's got no memory. So he's in Los Angeles. I think it's Los Angeles, San Francisco. He's in San Francisco, in hospital. Comes round in the morgue, and there's a supporting cast of characters. And there's the big bad is the Master, one of the big villains of Doctor Who, played in this because he's been killed as well, but his sort of essence has survived as some kind of green goo, played by Eric Roberts. I quite liked Eric Roberts. In fact, Eric Roberts, I'd remembered he was supposed to be the big new thing in the 80s, and here he was playing a baddie with a big collar thing. So that didn't. Where it sort of goes wrong is it's neither one thing nor the other. It's not like proper Doctor Who. I mean, people said, it hasn't got the wobbly sets. Well, it never did have wobbly sets, really. It's not Crossroads.
Crossroads, you malign a great British institution.
Things like motorcycle chases and romance between the Doctor and the person who's helping him, in this case a medical doctor, stuff like that was just like, what is this? Does not compute. So Doctor Who disappeared again until it restarted with the Christopher Eccleston ones years later. So so this one sits on its own, and I'd have to say I quite enjoyed the book, because it didn't, you don't have to think, wow, are we getting Doctor Who back? Are we getting Doctor Who with a big budget? Oh no, it's terrible. You don't have to worry about any of that, because that's all ancient history. It works quite well, like I say, 90s stuff. It's just got those movie type tropes of building up to a big climax with sort of a big light show and stuff like that. That's really tiresome, because it's like, oh, we've seen that so many times, why do we have to have this as Doctor Who? I'd say it's got a Star Trek, the one with the whale kind of vibe.
I was going to ask if there were any whales
a bit
rescued
wrong.
in it.
Well, yes, it's a whale rescuing kind of movie, even though that doesn't in the slightest bit happen.
Damn.
So, yeah, that's where I'd put that, but yeah, I quite enjoyed reading it, so that's good. That was my Novelisation November. I bought some books I haven't got around to reading. A couple of Draculas. I was intrigued that the Dracula Francis Ford Coppola movie was novelised by Fred Saberhagen, who, a bit like John Gardner, he'd been writing a Dracula series. Very different, because in the Fred Saberhagen books, Dracula, which is written first person by Dracula, not me. My name is Fred Saberhagen. No, so Dracula is telling us his own story, and it's a bit of an apologetics kind of thing where, it's like, well, they Painted Me So Black, but it didn't really happen like that. Obviously, none of that happens in this, so be interested to see what that's like. And then something I've wanted for ages, not the edition I really wanted, but Dracula's Daughter novelisation of the Universal movie. I think it's one of the best of the Universal Draculas, or Universal horrors, really. I'm never sure which ones of these Ramsey Campbell wrote. I think he wrote 3 out of 6. He's written an introduction to this one. But yeah, Dracula's Daughter is awesome, so keen to see how that works out. Okay, that was my Novelisation November. Goodbye.
Adios.